are great. Oh, thank you, Diana. But we have a very active UiPath community, and it's a great thing to see. So any questions, anything, like Diana said, put in chat. If we have any time at the end, we can unmute and have a discussion or anything, but thank you for attending. So with that, of course, we've already done the introductions. I'm just going to go over a really quick sliver of Azure. And then we're going to actually look at the UiPath ADO integration, the plugins and the CI/CD setup and configuration. And then we're going to actually walk through some of the setup steps and the full integration, including running, and where the tests actually land and everything through Orchestrator. And if you have Test Suite, through Test Manager. And then I have a slide at the end. And of course, thanks to Diana, we'll be sending out the slides with the recording that will have helpful links for you guys, and we can do a Q&A. Okay. So with this, and I know a lot of you will know what Azure and Azure DevOps and Azure Pipelines is, but for those of you that just need a little reminder of different components, trigger tells a pipeline to run. Of course, really one thing when we talk about CI/CD is when is it going to trigger? What is going to be the intent? Whether it's code check-in from developers, automatically runs a set of tests or test sets, and maybe it's a regression or what have you. It can be scheduled, it can be on check-in or other things, of course. And then, of course, you guys are familiar with the different stages, whether it's compiling, testing, executing the tests or what have you in the pipeline, and the agents and jobs that actually will run. My environment today actually is going to be connected to a GitHub, but our Azure Dev, and then it pulls from our GitHub or my GitHub, a small test, and then on check-in, or what we're going to do here is probably manually kick it off. In the CI/CD, it will communicate to a build agent, and then talk to UiPath Orchestrator, which will have a test set up, and we'll walk through all that to initiate the robots to execute tests. Of course, the assumption we're going to play with today is that I already have some automated tests, and they are actually pushed up to Orchestrator. So if there are any questions around that, please let me know, okay? Because we can go back a little bit further of a step. The assumption today is that you guys already have some tests automated, and they're pushed up to Orchestrator. So from there, we'll actually deal with everything. So one thing that you're going to be, that I want to make you aware of is UiPath does have a plugin for Azure DevOps for the pipeline components. And what happens is when you install that plugin, it will actually on the right, and I'll walk you through this as well, provide different core tasks that you can fill in. So a few, and you can see along the right side is kind of a screenshot, UiPath pack. So it will actually be used within the pipeline to basically do the packaging, for lack of a better way of saying it, given the source code. The deploy, of course, will deploy a process automation package, so pulling from Orchestrator. And test, of course, is the testing phase that you would actually initiate your test executions there. So we have 6 components. The install platform. So if there's a prepackaged, this is prepackaged tool that all other UiPath tasks use. Excuse me. You only require it if a build agent does not have access to the myget.org though. So this isn't a required. Sorry about that, just need a sip. As well with UiPath Manage Assets, this allows you to, is used to deploy, update, or delete any assets from the Orchestrator instance. So add or what have you along there. And then run job, well, that's to deploy, to start the job basically for an already deployed instance. But we will go into that a little bit more, and I'll walk through the YAML within Azure DevOps. Of course, this is something that you guys are probably pretty familiar with, but we can deal with a single stage and environment, or multi-branch with a single environment, or multi-stage, multi-branch, and per environment. So something like a dev, QA, and production. Of course, in tests, we're not going to actually touch on production environment typically. That's, from a QA perspective, not as recommended. But as well, this works for your automation from RPA as well. So I see a question here on that install part. Would that be things such as installing a program for the bot to use? No, that would actually be done in the orchestrator, and we will actually be going over that. Okay, Tracy, but great question.
And Lyndsey, I think there's one more question up. It is
Did
from
I miss
Shan.
the other?
Yes, this one from Shantriagi. If we don't have ADO, does the CI/CD work with the same way for other platforms such as MFS?
It does work very similarly. There are instructions for Jenkins and other CI/CD platforms. Of course, there's a little bit of a tweak depending on where you're finding things, but it does all work very similarly. So great questions. So really the flow that we're going to, after setup, of course, whether it's commit code changes or initiate from Git, or in my case, like I said, just for visibility, I might actually just kick it off in the Azure DevOps, the pipeline itself. We have it set up to do both, but just for timeliness and watching the log and stuff, we'll probably do that. But from here as well, then it goes into reaching out to orchestrators. So the Azure DevOps, Jenkins, or whatever CI/CD you're using will communicate with orchestrator, and that's what that plugin connection will do, of course, as well as the components. And then from there, the orchestrator, the UiPath orchestrator, will connect to the robots and trigger these robots, one or many, will execute tests that you already have set into test sets in orchestrator. And then, of course, any results will go back into steps of pass or fail in the CI/CD. So in our case, Azure DevOps, but it will also feed back into Test Manager. So we can actually do trending, understanding of what the overall test status is from your ADO initiated or triggered automations, as well as any other automations that are running elsewhere, initiated through orchestrator or other means, and manual tests. So you can see the overall components of your quality efforts. And of course, if you have ALM integrations, it can feed and be visible into those as well. So with that, we're going to dive into the tools. Enough slideware. So with that, and I do have an ending slide that I'll pop up with some helpful links. And this will actually have the link to, for example, you see right here, the UiPath integration for Azure DevOps. So here's the plugin that you would grab. Of course, in Azure DevOps, you can do a search for UiPath as well to actually grab this extension. And of course, it goes through any of the tasks that we looked at, snippets, arguments, as well as the UiPath pack that we talked about, install, and other components, UiPath deploy that we talked about in the slides. Okay. So with that, we're going to go into Orchestrator. Like I said, first, we need the automated tests and to bring them up into Orchestrator. From there, the biggest thing that you're going to check is make sure that you have it under your folder or what have you, and under testing, test sets. Here, I'm actually going to focus on running my LB resort check. This is actually because when I was automating some things a little bit back, I was booking a family vacation, so I was checking out resorts in Orlando for Disney World. My daughter wanted to go to Disney World. So we're going to actually look at automations based on that. From here, of course, you're going to at least want to check to make sure that it runs in Orchestrator first, that there's no issues for the first time before setup, just to make sure that there's no problems. If you don't, it's not going to be the end of the world, but my QA brain always makes sure that everything works at every step for the initial at least. And then from there, we're going to actually dive into Azure. So in here, and I'll actually grab the repo first, you can see that I have my GitHub repo connected to Azure, Azure DevOps, I should say properly. And I actually have a project here with my Azure pipeline YAML. And of course, I can see this in the pipelines as well. It doesn't matter which way you go about it, but I can choose to edit it here as well. And from here, one of the components or the things that we talked about when you add the extension is on the right side here in this tasks section. So if I search on UiPath, if you have the extension installed, you'll see those different components. And of course, as you click, let's put UiPath test because I'm going to add more tests. It will actually walk you through easily, choose an execution method and everything like that. So execute a test set or tests and projects, the connection, and you can fill out throughout any timeouts or what have you. So it makes it a very user-friendly way of setting things up. And then when you click add, I already have something set up, so I won't, but it would actually add the components here. So you can see I have a test project here. Here, I'm actually, this is the task for UiPath tests. I just put at 4. I was adding different things before, but that's my little reference. So I've added my tests here. My target test is a test set, exactly like I've set here. The test set full set is one of my other names, but you'll see that LB resort check. That is going to be the test set that we looked at in Orchestrator that I'm going to actually run. The Orchestrator connection is Bratlin ADO version 1. And of course, you would set this up, and we'll go over that in a second, in Orchestrator to connect to ADO, or in the admin, I should say, not Orchestrator. Folder name, so Sandbox Lyndsey. If I go back to my Orchestrator, I'm under Sandbox here in a folder, and Lyndsey, here's that resort check. And then, of course, I can do a trace level information, debug, error, or what have you that you want to output. Of course, before that, you're going to need to add a few other components. So, of course, a few basic things in settings. And you can see some things commented out as well. But this actually encompasses almost everything that you're needing here. Of course, in that page, it will show you exactly what components to add along the way. And depending on if you're using it that needs the binaries, doesn't have access to certain things, you may need the install or what have you to pre-install the UiPath components before it can run. Would I see a question, would you do a pipeline per folder as a best practice? Not necessarily, it depends on the intent. For me, a pipeline is for a certain purpose. So I might actually do something like historically, in my experience, a dev code check-in for any project or what have you, I might actually run my smoke test, and then I might also run a lighter regression. You'll have your full set of automation regression that might be running every week or based on like at the end of every sprint or other things. But you may have different small test set components, like a smoke test. And if that passes, then you want to run a light sort of regression before any code check-in is truly successful and not kicked out, to make sure that the basics work before it goes into any real QA processing. I would add multiple test sets because I can use that smoke test elsewhere. In production or in pre-prod releases and stuff as well. So that reusability, I would always see what the instance is and grab the different test sets. I like a modular test set personally, so that like I said, a smoke test is maybe the 5 or 6 end-to-end like most basic processes. If those don't pass, nothing should pass. You know what I mean? And then I might add a few more tests in a different test set for, this is the dev test set, as well as, of course, their unit testing and other things. And that would all be in one pipeline. Then again, for pushing to a QA environment, that might run a smoke test first and then a broader set of test cases, functional test cases, maybe some focusing more on integration as well with other components. So, and that allows you to do kind of a Lego block approach. So that's how I typically work. But you don't have to. You can do a one-to-one very easily. I hope that answers your question. But for me, it's if I do kind of modular Lego blocks in testing and test sets, then I use them in many different places and maintain them in one. And it just makes my life a whole lot easier, is what I find. I hope that helps. So with this, as you add components, of course, one thing that you're going to do, and I do have this in the links, so I'll just touch base on one other thing. We do have a document here in the community blog on how to implement the CI/CD with steps. And of course, we have other documentation within UiPath documentation as well. But in order to actually grab everything, one thing to remember is you are going to have to grab the certificate and bring it into the admin orchestrator to have that communication. So after we build the YAML, one thing that we'll do, and I don't need to go over the user and settings and certificates, but in the orchestrator, one thing that you're going to do is you're going to go into this 9-box or grid here and go into the admin, and it is in these steps as well. And you're going to add Azure DevOps as an external application here. And here you can see I have an Azure DevOps connection. And if I edit, I've actually gone into or set the Azure DevOps connection. I've configured and then added secret IDs, and I have an app ID that I can pass back. So this is actually where we're creating that communication step by step. And then from here, that will pass the results back into Orchestrator, of course, and then to Test Manager. So I hope that helps. So if we dive back into the pipeline, assuming I have that connection, and like I said, I can send the doc, or I believe in that slide, I have the document with everything in every individual step. But after creating the YAML, we can actually run this. And that does have samples in that document as well of YAML code and other things like that. Really, in my opinion, I would always recommend just easily doing the quick UiPath and filling out the different components very quickly and easily here that you need. and then you just try and run it, see if there's anything else you need on here. I'm more than happy to share samples though, otherwise. I see a comment, my build is successful, but I'm getting test and deploy errors even after installing .NET 6 and .NET SDK. It's the .NET command exe error. So are there any other things to be installed? So I'd be curious about what exact error you're getting. And Atul, you may actually have a bit more experience on honing in on what exact error that means. Your build is successful, but getting the test and deploy error. So I'm wondering if you have the plugin installed, but have you done that orchestrator or the admin connection there to actually get back into pulling the tests from orchestrator? That would be the question and the component I would check.
Right, and maybe if time permits, we can look at the end, or we can plan some other session. We are actually planning one of the session to address these kind of questions if anyone is facing any specific issue. So we
Yep,
can look into that.
absolutely. I will finish my go over first, but we will take note of your question and see if we can either work at the end of the session or afterward in regard to that. Okay. So from pipelines here, once I'm done the YAML creation, of course, I can click and just run the pipeline here. Before that, I'm going to show a couple other things because I've already run it this morning, for example. And I just want to go through. So under here, you can see I have some errors. Of course, as a demo, I'm always going to have something fail just to be able to dive into a failure, etc. So if I go into the job here, and it is just showing a warning, you can see it initialized the job. It checked out my ADO code with the YAML. The one-line script, this is just my dev trigger, and it's just really creating a hello world at that point. I have a few others, but this is, of course, a basic one. I did do the install platform just as a cover. And then I actually did an exercise to provide a listing of files. I was checking the output in a few things, pretty minor, not required to do the list files, for example, or the run a one-line script. If you're not having a development trigger it, a check-in trigger it, then you don't need anything but the GitHub reference and install platform. And then list files, like I said, you don't really need. I wanted to add some checks along the way to make sure that exactly like the question, what and where is everything working correctly? Of course, then the UiPath test here went to execute. You can see the version, author, etc. And you can see running tests. So 2 tests, and as it actually ran things, 1 failed and then 1 passed. Now, this is a little bit of a awkward way, especially if you're running multiple tests or multiple parallel robots. In my instance, I only have the 1 configured. It does not mean that you can't run many bots in parallel. Actually, I would recommend it. My Azure config only allows for the 1 right now. I have to get it extended. That's all. But from here, you can go through the log, of course, and then publish the artifacts back to orchestrator and finalize the job. So all in all, it takes a small amount of time. And I'll just run it right now. And you'll see some pop-ups, like I said, of me trying to look up hotel bookings, for example. Pretty basic tests, a few verifications and other things like that pop up. But from here, The next thing that we're actually going to look at as this is compiling, and then it will start running in a few seconds here, is, and you'll start seeing the pop-ups. What we do want to understand is, instead of going into the CI/CD, especially on code check-in or a regular scheduled job, it's going to be a bit of a pain to go through all the logs in the CI/CD, especially depending on how many pipelines you're running and other tests. So we're going to look at the executions in Orchestrator just very quickly, and then we're going to show the effects and where it can land in Test Manager. So if you have the Test Suite components, including, of course, Test Manager, that will make a big difference in regard to visibility and reporting, as well as diving into, oh, and I can't find key account name for app. Oh, and there we go. So it did the initialization, the install, since I hadn't run it in a while. Of course, maybe it took a tiny bit more than if it's run in the regular fashion, but you can see my daughter was interested in trying to stay at the Disney, one of the Disney hotels. So we were just looking for availability. Because when you have an automation tool, why not have it check for you? And wow, looking at those, we would not have stayed at a Disneyland hotel or a Disney World hotel at those prices. Wow, it's changed. And then, of course, it's running another test to check a different, I believe this one is a different hotel at this point. So I think I checked 2 pretty lucrative hotels in this, which neither actually was the one we selected, but the Polynesian, and I think the other one was the Grand Floridian, just because of recommend and stuff. So in this, it's just running and it will finish the execution. And this is something you guys are familiar with any RPA or, of course, test in general. And so it's almost finished executing. It's just about to send, you can see uploading the results to Azure DevOps and everything here. And it's finished the job. And of course, with an expected 1 failed, 1 passed sort of idea. Of course, for any API tests and stuff, this can work headless. You don't have to go through the GUI. So there's, of course, different options there. From here, we're going to dive into Orchestrator. And of course, under that testing, you're going to see that in test sets, the resort check actually was what we referenced. And I can look at the test executions and see that it ran, that it, yes, failed because it had one test that failed, and it can show you. Now, one thing that was a question before that I'm going to double back on quickly is the robots. So in the Orchestrator, before I go into Test Manager, what you can do is if you go into the Orchestrator, if you go to Home, you can check certain machines and make sure that for a folder that you have highlighted, like my Lyndsey folder or my colleague, you can actually manage the access or add different robots that can be used. And so you'll do that with Home. And then when I clicked on the machines, you can manage access and manage the machines here. So if I choose to do multiple in parallel, I can look up different machines or other robots or what have you and add them here. So I can add one to use my colleague's machine, maybe another colleague's machine, a couple of VPN machines that I have set up, and I can update, and then it can run across in parallel. But this is how you would add certain machines that you can use to run those tests if they can run in parallel. Okay, and of course the test set will set that up. I hope that answers that question. I see Tracy has another question. So we will need to use both ADO and Orchestrator to see the results and do the testing. So you'll need Orchestrator to connect to your CI/CD. The reason is because Azure or Jenkins or whatever CI/CD you want to use will communicate to Orchestrator and say, hey, under testing, here's the test set I want to run. This makes it visible here. This can be actually used or pulled. You can create test sets in the Orchestrator from, of course, test cases that are accessible in Test Manager. And of course, you just publish them up and they'll show in Orchestrator under automations. So if I look at, or my apologies, under testing test cases. So sorry about that. So yesterday, I actually did a different, yesterday or the day before, I did a few different mobile tests. So as soon as I push those up in Studio to publish and push them, not just set them to publishable, but push them up to publish, they will be visible here under the testing test cases. And then of course, when you create test sets, I'll just cancel this, but we can click and add a test set. You can select different already prepackaged test sets or what have you here to actually initiate from your CI/CD. The test manager component can be, you don't have to use Orchestrator or Azure DevOps for the reporting or seeing results if you want. I just want to go through each section and show you what is visible. But with the pipelines, the different logs and stuff, personally, it's a bit of a pain to sift through, especially if you're running multiple jobs, multiple test sets, multiple pipelines. And going in all those logs is kind of a pain. So I actually prefer to see everything in Test Manager. So even though I can see the executions, and yes, that this ran 4 minutes ago, if I look in Test Manager, and this is where I just find it easier for a user, and we do feed the results back into Test Manager here. So if I look at my sandbox here, I can look at different test sets. So my resort check, for example, you can see that it fed the results back into Orchestrator, and through Orchestrator, because I have that link from the Test Manager to Orchestrator, it can feed it into Test Manager, and that's the only place I have to look. So as a QA, I may not have access to the CI/CD, to Azure or what have you, to look at the logs either. Depending, I may or may not have access to Orchestrator, depending on roles and responsibilities, right? But I can see everything in Test Manager too. So I can see that this ran 6 minutes ago. I can initiate or execute manually. I can look into the pass or fail, the duration, and information here. And of course, I can look at the test sets, click through the test results, and it's all clickable. You can see that the source, the Orchestrator initiated this. If I were to, not override, but if I were to rerun this, so execute automated, this would actually show that the source is Test Manager initiated it. So you can tell where it initiated. In the test results, if I look over here, one of the biggest things that I find of value is actually one of our, and I apologize, Atul and Diana, but this is actually one of our autopilot AI components. So not only can you see a pass, fail, and information, but I have the ability in Test Manager to look at results and do what's called generate insights. This is an AI report that actually looks at trends based on historical executions. This I'm finding personally to be hugely helpful. And all you have to do is click on Generate Insights, and you can say within the last 7 days, or I usually do in the last 30. And then from here, you can see that it's processing, it's creating a new insights report. I created one this morning, all right. This takes a few seconds. And if you want to, if you don't want to wait, you'll get an alert when it's finished in the bell here in Test Manager. And from here, this gives you some tangible insights on where the failures are, what is the percentage, where the problems might be, or what type of errors they might be. And this actually comes from information from executing the tests, of course, that initiated from Azure. In this case, you can see the overall failure rate is up to over 41%. So 7 of my 17 test executions failed. Well, in the last few days, I've run a few different test sets. Normally, this would, as a QA, alarm me. 41% of my automations are failing is a huge concern. As a demo system, I have at least a few things failing on every test set intentionally so I can drill into them, plus show passing. So this is less concerning in that scenario, but as a QA, this would be a really big concern that so many of my automations are failing. You can see that it's high severity errors for 100% of the total errors. So of all the 7 that failed, 100% of them were high risk failures here. So I had a core problem there that was high severity. And the test set had a failure rate. This box, our LB Sandbox, had the failure rate. So this test set that we looked at, that resort check, is 100% of those failures. So maybe not my smoke test, maybe not my regression, the resort check was the problem. And then, of course, you can see the top failing tests, any common errors. So it actually bubbles up errors, common errors, error patterns. So UI errors accounted for 14% of the errors. Validation errors, which I know what the failure is, I actually state, make sure that I go to the Polynesian site for the room, and then I verify that it's Grand Floridian in one case and a few others. So that's a validation error in my automation that's actually failing. So that's something I need to fix in my script. And then, of course, recommendations. So not only are you seeing pass fail, it's actually doing some trend analysis to give you insight when things start failing more than once. Maybe network, maybe it can't initiate the test for some reason, or in my case, my verification in my test is actually the thing that's failing. So I'm looking at and validating the wrong thing. Or maybe I'm directing to the wrong place. But this gives you a bit more insights, and I don't mean to just key on the term insights, but it gives you visibility into a bit more of a what it could be without having to dig into the Azure logs, especially if you don't have access. As a QA test executor, you may not have access to the CI/CD, etc., and this would be a problem, right? So, Chitan, if you had a question, if you got any issues in CI/CD, where do you need to look? Well, if it doesn't actually trigger the pipeline itself or communicate to Orchestrator, you would actually have to look in your Azure DevOps pipelines. So in here, I actually go into the pipeline. So I'll start from where we would start looking. So this is the pipeline that I have running. I would click into the pipeline, and you can see that I have warnings because, of course, I had a test fail, and you can see where. And I would look into this and see what component. So the same view that we looked at before, but this is how you get to it. See what errors or warnings are coming in here, as well as in the job. I typically want to see at what point, because at the initialized job or the list files or what have you, it's going to show me what part of the YAML file actually was causing an issue. So if it doesn't initiate tests for some reason, I can look into here and an appropriate error, like maybe could not connect to Orchestrator or could not find the test set or something like that, among many other different ways, of course, would actually be shown here. If you're having problems with UiPath that it can't actually find a component, you might have forgotten to do the UiPath install platform. Then you actually go into the YAML. So I would go back in, edit, and of course, add that component. So the install platform, and then I can just do, I might be missing a path to the client's NuGet package or new package. Or maybe I just need to set the version of the CLI or what have you. So it might be something that simple, but that helps you troubleshoot along the way. If you have something more specific, we can definitely dive into it. So one thing we can do is I'll just bring up the one slide just to give the last kind of view of information, and then we can go into a bit more unmuted Q&A if you'd like. So I'm just going to do this, and of course, so I do have helpful links here, and so I have that steps doc for pipeline setup that I actually showed. It shows the components and some sample YAML code and other things like that. We do have a short video, I believe this is 4 or 5 minutes, that walks through every component in detail. And then, of course, the link to the UiPath Azure DevOps plugins is right here, which I did show. And then Azure DevOps pipeline concepts, if you have any questions for the generals. I'm pretty sure that you guys are pretty familiar, but that was that one first slide on Azure. So with that, why don't we open it up and see if there are any other questions or specifics that we can discuss?
I do have, Lyndsey, one thing to add. I don't
Okay.
know, it was me when I was planning to implement. I remember there was one stage where I think, and it is for the free tier, where I have to request a Azure DevOps parallelism request form, submit that. So I vaguely remember that I have submitted twice, and it was for the free tier. So do you have any idea, or if you want to share something with our audience, like what exactly that is? I'm trying to recollect, but I don't remember. But I am pretty sure I've submitted it 2 times when I was using free tier to integrate this one within my R&D project. You have any idea on that, what I'm talking, or like, I mean, I can
I
look into the
don't. I'm
previous.
trying. I don't. I'm trying to think of like, are you talking to add the extension or a
While running,
feature
let's
as
say,
in the
yes.
connection for the requirements and stuff
So
in
after
test
this
manager?
step, yes. So after this step, when I was trying to run, I was
Mhm.
getting an error that you don't have that the parallelism, and that is where I have to submit
Ah,
a form.
oh, okay. Okay. And unfortunately, in this instance, like I said, it's actually not due to my UiPath. I
Okay.
can run it in many different robots, but my Azure instance won't allow me to run it in parallel
Okay.
because I actually have to expand my Azure instance or do that request. So I don't actually have the answer that I can show, but I can definitely a tool. That's a great point because frankly, even though I have this as set up, even I want to be able to expand to do parallel because that's how things are really run a lot of times. You're not going to run everything in sequence. So you and I actually can take that offline and maybe I can try and find that information. Oh,
Yes.
perfect.
Yeah, I've just put a link. This is the form that I've submitted, and it's a free tier. It normally takes 24 to 48 hours. But yes, this is something just want to make sure if anyone is trying to do in a free tier, they are encountering this issue. So you may need to submit this form. And if you require more details, anyone if having facing this issue, we can definitely help you out. But this is just sometimes when you face these kind of errors, like I spend a lot of time to figuring it out. So if you're also facing
Mhm.
this issue, anyone, please try to submit this one. At least you will know that this is a possible error that you may receive while trying to set this up.
And that's great because even I would probably hit that next. So thank you for actually mentioning that. What I'm going to do is, Diana, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to update my helpful links slide and add this link to it because I
Great.
do think that this is very valuable and something that all of us can all use some help with. So thank you, Atul. I really appreciate that. That's, I think,
No.
one of the things when I only have it running in parallel because my free instance only is allowing the one. And until I get expanded, I wouldn't have hit this. So you've helped me. The community has helped me in this.
Thank you so much.
Are there any other questions? We've had some great interaction on chat.
Yes, I think we have covered most of them, and this one for I think is Gitri. So we are definitely this is something not only for the session based upon the feedback from the last 4 sessions. We are getting requests to set up another call for looking into specific issues. Again, I will be very candid and honest. It sometimes becoming even if we schedule 1 or 2 sessions, looking into individual issues sometimes become challenging,
Yep.
but you can always try to reach out to individuals. Like I'm getting a lot of like messages if we can set up a call with them. I am trying to do as much as I can, same other speakers also, but if it's not possible, believe us, like we want to help, but sometimes individual issues can take more than what we are expecting. We will try to conduct a session where we can tackle as many as issues that you guys are facing. So let's just watch. I'm going to discuss after this series with Diana and other speakers when we can plan that session.
Thanks, Atul.
And please keep in mind that actually, believe it or not, when I do proof of concepts with customers or other things like that, sometimes it's that half the battle seems to be access. So that's always something to keep in mind as well, is do you have access to all the components you need? If you don't have access to, you have access to pipelines, but not to running or executing certain components or what have you. My experience, half the time, that's actually part of the issue. Is that your experience as well, Atul?
Yes, exactly. And I remember there was one more issue when I was trying to do it. It was more related to some copying a code, where I think there was a lack in the documentation, which I think is fixed now. It was trying to copy a token, but it was something different. So yes, it is always something about a slight mistake that we are trying to do or not following. So those kind of issue I have seen where some gaps can lead into more like frustration and more time consuming. But if we'll try to follow those steps carefully, I think that is where most of the issue starts coming or we start facing.
Yeah. So that's something, another one that I hit. I had my GitHub set up and everything. I was trying to connect. And way back, if I step back to when I was starting to set this up, when I first created my Azure DevOps, I couldn't see the repos tab. I had to dive into Azure DevOps and try and find the correct admin settings so I could give myself access to the repo tab. Because otherwise I can connect to the test, but I couldn't trigger based on check-in, for example. So I find a lot of these are common little quirks and all to do with access.
Absolutely. And same way in the test manager also, there are few settings like, for example, you want to turn off bugs, Epic. I kind of face that issue. Where is my features why not showing? So there are some toggle buttons in the UiPath Test Manager which we forget to enable. So totally agree with that.
So I'm going to start with a few of the chat questions as well. So when it comes to the error logs, is it obvious when there's an issue between the ADO and UiPath? In my experience, it's pretty obvious. It's not connecting to Orchestrator. It's not able to grab the tests kind of idea. There's a very clear sort of indicator. And of course, in the Orchestrator, it hasn't received anything. So you're actually looking into, if I go back to my Orchestrator, you're not seeing any trigger, anything execute. You're not seeing any monitoring or automation run or anything like that. So if I go into tests, for example, you're not seeing any executions very quickly. It's only in Azure, for example, in that. So I find it pretty easy to do. And there's only a couple things that actually do the connection from ADO, of course, and from Orchestrator. So there's very little to troubleshoot. Just to make sure of those few steps. And that's something maybe that I'll create just a small additional slide and highlight that. The steps for the keys and secret. Or the, I'll add that in the links for the steps to do that, because that's actually a common thing. I have another question. Is the test has the test suite went live and available for cloud users? Absolutely. Test suite, to my understanding, in cloud has been available for about 3 to 4 years. The insights component is newer. It is available for all of our cloud customers in preview, and to Atul's comment early, the AI stuff is in customer preview in our cloud environment as well. So that insights is a very small component of our AI for Test Manager. There is much more that is added to that for the next demo, but that is all available in cloud. And just because it's customer preview, you're able to use it. It is going GA, I think end of this month or in July. So, but it's accessible for anyone, any of our cloud users. And then another question, is there any session related to TaskTop? So Atul and Diana, I can ask you that, but we definitely do use the TaskTop, the Test Manager Connect, and there are sessions and recordings that are available for that otherwise, but we can do a session on something like that.
Yeah, definitely. We'll add that also in our agenda and for future sessions. As of now, Naveen, it is not planned, but again, based upon your feedbacks, we are collecting all these feedbacks and we'll plan some sessions in future for sure.
Yeah, sure, Atul, because these are the future which is affecting for the live section. Since we have integrated with Jira, where the bugs are directly coming to the generic pool, we are unable to link to direct project. So we are seeing most of the things.
Definitely, this is again, I have noted this one. There are few similar like requests. So let's see. I mean, I can't promise when that section will be, but this is in our list. Immediately after the series, all the speakers along with Diana, we are going to meet and take the feedback and see what else can be done in order to provide these sessions. But please, I mean, yeah, Diana has also shared her email. Please shoot her those requests or feedback, and we will be making sure that we don't miss those.
Right.
Well, we are almost there, but thank you so very much, Lyndsey. Really appreciate your help here and helping the community. I hope this session is helpful to everyone. This is one of the session that everyone was looking from the last couple of previous series also. And once again, I request everyone to please register for our next session, which is on June 7th. This is related to the AI. We are going to cover more into generative AI. We are going to cover how this overall enhances the test automation experience, practical demonstration, and some real world use cases. So a lot about AI. I'm also excited about that session. If anybody asks, please don't miss that session. It's going to be really excited, especially in the world where we are hearing AI every day. So this is one session that is not to be missed. So highly encourage everyone. And I think Diana has also shared all the links from the previous recording for this session also. As soon as the recording becomes available, Diana will share the presentation and the recording. But once again, thank you so very much, everyone. Special thanks to Lyndsey. Diana, you want to say any last word?
Just thank you, everybody. I appreciate you coming, and I appreciate you putting so many questions in the chat. That really helps us to understand kind of where you're at and what you need. So please do reach out to me if you want another session, any ideas you have, and we'll put that together hopefully sometime in June or early July. And thank you, Lyndsey and Atul, as you're amazing.
Thank
Great
you so much.
session.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great
Great
rest of
session.
the week, everyone.
Thank
You
you.
too. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.